So, this seems like something that a lot of people are talking about, and I just want to give my 2 cents. So, should Tony Ferguson retire? I mean, I think most of us already know the answer to that, but I think we should probably get into the details on the situation a little bit. And obviously, Tony Ferguson, he's on a 7 fight losing streak at this point. Now, it's not the worst one ever because if you get into the details, which most people usually don't, they just hear, 0-7, and then wow, that's so bad. But when you see the kind of guys he's fighting, right? He's fighting Justin Gagey, Chandler. He's losing to a lot of top tier, a lot of power strikers, and so it's like he's lost to guys that most people usually lose to, or at least even have problems. Even Khabib was kind of running away from Gagey quite a bit in their fight, so those aren't like bad losses in any way. But at the same time, I think when you look at what makes someone, it's kind of like what is someone's weapons, right? Some people, everyone has a different weapon when they go into the sport, and a lot of this is dependent on their style. Someone's style makes or breaks their success for the most part. Now, a lot of people in the sport, they kind of have very, kind of basic styles, hands up. They punch, they kick. Usually they throw a lot of low kicks. They won't really throw body kicks, won't really throw too many head kicks, nothing, no spinning attacks. Like a lot of 1-2s, kicks ending on the legs. Maybe they'll go in for like a kind of a, half-assed double leg every now and then. That's kind of like your modern day kind of like non-ranked fighter. But when you get to the top 10, especially top 5, you start noticing that these guys have unique styles. They're kind of like puzzles that need to be figured out. And you see this with champions, like Khabib, for instance. I mean, he was a champion where every fight that he won, people were kind of learning a little bit more about how to solve the puzzle. And he retired before anyone could solve the puzzle. But you'll see this with a lot of champions who are successful for a very long time, is that the more fights that they win, the more people start to kind of realize cracks in their game. They'll kind of figure out like how their styles work, and then at some point they start to kind of get they go from being like the absolute best champion to being kind of maybe a top 5 fighter. So I think a really good example would probably be someone like Dominic Cruz. I mean, when he first came onto the scene, no one knew what was going on. They didn't know how to attack him. They were just kind of throwing things and hoping that things landed. But as you can see, the more he fights, the more tape people have on him. And so now people can clearly kind of see like, hey, I could throw a 1-2. He'll move off to the corner of it, and then he'll go right into my leg kick. So people are kind of realizing how that style works. Same thing with the whole like hands down kind of bobbing and weaving style, kind of like that's Conor McGregor style. That's Bobby Green style. That kind of style, like people are figuring out that, hey, if I throw some feints and if I throw some head kicks in there, then these guys, all of a sudden their hands are going to move up. And then once their hands are up, then there's just kind of a normal fighter at that point. But for Tony Ferguson specifically, his style, his foundation is entirely based off, one, his athleticism. He's talked about playing all these sports, doing wrestling, baseball. He's a very athletic guy. But at the same time, no matter how athletic you are, the older you get, the more you start to slow down. So we're seeing that he doesn't really have the pop in his shots. He doesn't really have the quickness to kind of move away from shots. Because again, he's not a head movement guy. He's not really a martial art guy. He's more of an athletic guy who's kind of come onto the martial arts scene. So you won't see him do a lot of, blocking, a lot of head movements. He's not like a boxing martial art guy. So he won't. If you're older, those are the things that you want to incorporate, because it's not dependent off of power and youth. Essentially, it would be based off, okay, if you know how to maybe do some kung fu blocks or something like that, doesn't take a lot of energy. It can get you out of the situation, and we're kind of seeing Sean Strickland do that. Actually, he'll put the hands out in a kung fu way, where you can't really land a shot just because his arms are in the way. So, but it uses no energy. So if he wanted to incorporate something like that, that could actually help him continue to fight into an older age. But he doesn't do that. It's all based off athleticism, all based off like speed and power, which he's going to have less and less and less of. And then the second thing is his chin. His chin was one of his greatest assets moving up into his career, and you could clearly see that he was very dependent off of it. But, you know, unfortunately, the beginning of the end for him was he was going to fight Khabib, and then Khabib, you know, didn't make weight or he got hurt. I think that might have been that time where he fell and hit the toilet or something. And then Tony made weight, and then he wanted to take a fight against Justin Gaethje, and I think it was like 2 weeks later he decides to make weight again. Which again, if you're cutting a lot of weight, if you're going into low body fat percentages, none of this stuff is like a game. Like, this is your health is on the line. This is why someone like Paddy Pimblett, for instance, is no longer cutting all this weight. You know, he already talked about that he'll put on some weight after a fight, probably like maybe 15, 30 pounds, but he's not going to be putting on like 50 pounds like he was doing before, because, I mean, it's a very stress on your body. Your body wants to stay at a certain comfortable area. It's not comfortable with shooting up and then shooting way down and then shooting back up again. So for him to do that, cut all that weight, and then fight a guy that he, again, taking a fight on short notice, let's all really pay attention to all the short notice fights lately. Like, how did that work out for Usman? You know, like, he looked good in that fight, but again, he lost, you know? And if you're a guy who is fighting for legacy, not really for money, not really for the belt, taking a loss, even if it wasn't a bad loss, is still like a bad asterisk on your record. So for Usman to take that loss, that's bad. Same thing with Volkanovski coming in, and yeah, was it ballsy? Sure, but there's a fine line between someone being ballsy and someone being stupid, and that line is very, very close. And it kind of depends off what happened. I mean, a lot of people will say, "Oh yeah, Volk is so tough for taking that fight on short notice." But to me, I'm like, that was foolish, because look what happened. Let's be results orientated here. You know, if he got the win on that, then yeah, that was the smartest move ever, and he's got the biggest cojones out there and all that. But that's not what happened. He went out there, he looked like he hasn't been training. He, you know, wasn't moving forward. You know, there was no chance for him to win that fight, and you could clearly see how important a fight camp is, because not only do you develop a strategy on how to win, but then you act it out. You act it out in such a way that your subconscious gets trained to know how to move forward, what attacks to use. If he does this, then you do that. But if you just go into the fight, you know, against specific opponents, especially like a Islam or you know, like what Tony did with Justin Gaethje, I mean, that's a specific style. You know, you need to have a game plan for that. If you go in, there are some people that you could just go in there, and depending on your style, you might not need too much. Especially some fighters stay in shape all the time, but most guys don't. Most guys are not in shape. Most of the guys are not high IQ enough to be able to just come up with a game plan like mid-fight. Most guys just go in there, and what you see is what you get, and they're going to do 5 rounds that way for the most part. And but yeah, taking a fight short notice, never. There's really, I mean, maybe with Jalen Turner taking out Bobby Green, that was probably the only time where a guy came in there on short notice and actually gained a lot, because he was coming off a loss to Dan Hooker, and now look at him. Now he's right back to where he was, if not better, because in some ways Bobby Green has more spotlight than Dan Hooker does. So, you know, a loss of Dan Hooker, not a big deal, but a win over Bobby Green, that puts him in a good position. So, you know, there might be a few examples, if you guys want to put in the comments, of people that actually benefited off those kinds of short notice fights. But for the most part, I'm just seeing career after career, legacy after legacy being destroyed, or at the very least tarnished, over taking these fights that they really shouldn't have taken. You know, I think that's the problem with a lot of man league man, is that we think that we could just walk in there and just, I'll just willpower my way in there. I'll just will myself to power, and I'll just beat this guy, and I'll win because I believe it. And, you know, I mean, that may feel good to feel that way, but in actuality, it's like, you know, let's focus on the results, not like how you felt in the moment. But yeah, it's just Tony is, again, he's been KO'd so many times. And this is the key point I wanted to put in there, is that I think his fight with Paddy Pimblett was actually a horrible fight, because the fight wasn't so bad that he could go in there and say, you know what, I'm done, I'm washed up. It was to a point where, like, it wasn't that bad. Like, he's gotten KO'd in his previous losses. He got submitted against Bobby Green, but in this fight, he actually made it through to the decision. And I guess you could argue that he landed some okay shots throughout the fight. I mean, he made Paddy bleed, and honestly, I think that was mainly Paddy. I think Paddy was just, maybe he didn't train as hard as we thought, or what, but maybe it was that he had a little bit of ring rust, maybe, because he was breathing really hard through his mouth, and he was like basically exhausted by the second. And he said that he dropped his load against Tony in the first round. And honestly, that kind of flurry he threw at Tony wasn't that many punches. It might have been like 8, maybe 10 punches, maybe. So if that many punches was, his load, for instance, then that says more about his cardio than anything. But I mean, unfortunately, a really bad Paddy performance led to, now Tony thinks, well, he's not washed up because he didn't get knocked out, he didn't get submitted, and he had maybe some moments in the fight. So he's thinking like, oh, well, I might still have it. So unfortunately, in a weird way, if Paddy had knocked him out like viciously, then that probably would have been the end of his career, because then at that point we all would have understood. But now that he has like excuses to say, oh, well, I didn't get finished, I didn't get subbed, I had some moments, maybe I still got it. Maybe he could even blame Goggins and say, well, Goggins was the reason why maybe he overtrained, and that's why his performance wasn't that good. Or maybe he had an injury going into the fight. So he's going to use that as an excuse of, well, he still has it because he didn't lose at his best. So for all the people talking about Tony Ferguson, should he retire or not? I mean, should he? I don't think he's never going to get a title. He's never going to be even in the top 5, or even, honestly, I don't think he'll ever make it back to the top 10 even. Because again, he has no chin and he has no athleticism. His main weapons that he would go into a fight with that made him so dangerous, he doesn't have them anymore. So at this point, what does he have? He's just he looked better than Colby. He didn't really look that old in his movements and stuff like that, but he has no power to his shots. He has like no wrestling defense, which is weird because he was a wrestler growing up, but so he doesn't know how to wrestle. It's strange. His jiu-jitsu looks old. This again looks like the Gracie jiu-jitsu stuff that just doesn't work anymore. He's just trying to go for a triangle or an arm bar, and it's like people like Paddy can see that from a mile away. Like, this is an advanced era. So he doesn't really have any weapons at this point. He has no weapons. He has no real defense. The only reason he didn't get finished was because Paddy was just exhausted. If Paddy went in there, if that was a normal looking Paddy, he most likely would have knocked out Tony at some point in those barrages, because that's what he does. He kind of sprints at you and throws a bunch of punches. And, with Tony the way he is, I don't see any weapons that he can go in there and finish anybody. Not jiu-jitsu wise, not wrestling wise. He doesn't have power in his punches. He used to be a high volume guy. He would just chase you down, and then you would get exhausted, and then he would TKO you or submit you once you were weak and tired. But the only way you can do that is you'd have to be able to get through people throwing power shots at you. That's how the high volume guys work. They have to get through the power shots. And once the guy has thrown the power shots and he's exhausted, that's when, like a Nate Diaz type, that's when these high volume guys like Tony would then get the better of the power strikers. But he doesn't have the chin to do that. He doesn't have the chin or the athleticism to be able to avoid the shots or to power through them. So at this point, he should retire, but unfortunately, he probably won't, because he has too many reasons to say why he didn't really lose. So, I mean, I don't know. I'm not a huge Tony fan. I don't like the guy. I don't even like Goggins. So for me, this is a good situation, because if I get to see another guy potentially stomp him out or something, that's fun to me. I know everyone else is crying over it, which is strange, because do you guys even know who Tony Ferguson is? Like, I was introduced to him in The Ultimate Fighter, and this guy was not a good guy, total douchebag, going around telling people, one of the fighters, he was like, "Where's your kid at?" And he would get drunk and just start attacking the guy's kid and his relationship. Everyone's all mad right now about, oh, well, so and so was talking about so and so's dad. I mean, Tony was talking about this guy's kid, like, what, where's your kid at? And you're a bad father and all this stuff. And I even know some people that have met up with him in person, and they say he's a garbage human. Like, you want to get like autograph from him, and he'll look at you as if like who, I'm not gonna get. I don't know. Just the guy was not a good person from people that I know that met him. So I don't know. For me, I like to see this guy. To me, he's kind of like a Colby. I know everyone just throws all their anger and stuff at Colby, but for me, I'm kind of like, I don't really like Tony. Don't like him. Don't like Goggins. I feel like they're all mentally ill, kind of whack jobs. And unfortunately for them, reality is kind of knocking on their door, and they don't want to open the door, but at some point they're going to have to. So yeah, that's my 2 cents. I'll see you guys on the next one.